most of us know each other. If you don't, I'm Matt Galik. I am a frequent guest, frequent contributor to Mokena's Front Porch, our podcast here in town. I've been studying Mokena and our history since I was knee-high to a boll weevil back at Mokena Junior High. I've written 2 books about the history of Mokena. Was a columnist in the old Mokena Messenger for many years, writing about history. And I also keep a blog on the history of Mokena called Matt's Old Mokena. But today we're here to talk about St. John's Cemetery, and it is absolutely steeped in local history. We could easily do an all-day tour of it. If you were on our last tour of the cemetery last year, you probably remember me talking about that. You know, we could like bring a lunch and have a picnic over there, you know, all that fun stuff. But it's definitely one of Mokena's most historic landmarks. If you weren't there last year for the last tour or haven't seen it on YouTube, be sure to check it out. It'll kind of supplement this tour very, very well. But the cemetery was founded in 1863 in the middle of the Civil War, when Philippina Laufer was interred here in September of that year. And she's just right over there. Almost 2,000 people came after her. And the cemetery is still in use to this day. But when one studies this place, it quickly becomes evident how many really interesting personalities can be found here. Among them are many, many veterans with harrowing stories going as far back to the Civil War and continuing up to the Afghanistan conflict, when Aaron Toppin, who we all know, was interred here in June of 2014. But today we'll focus on individuals whose names are sadly all but forgotten by modern Mokena, but who rightly deserve to be remembered and revered by our community. There's lots of tragedy in today's tour, but also lots of heroism and bravery too. So let's start. Our first stop, if you will, is going to be just right behind us. I'll lead the way, and we'll get to know our first Mokenian on today's tour. Okay. Can everybody hear me okay? Okay, good. Fantastic. So here lies George Troyer, one of at least 8 Civil War veterans to be interred in this cemetery. And his story is one of unparalleled bravery. We should note the way his surname is spelled here on his gravestone indicates the German pronunciation of Troyer. But later on, as the years went on, his name in town sort of morphed a little bit. And actually, his daughter always went by the name of Trier, which was spelled slightly differently. But in any case, tragically, George Troyer did not have a very long life, as he was a young man when we lost him. But he was born in September 1841 in the village of Hügelheim in the Grand Duchy of Baden in the southwest of what is today Germany, and he lived a stone's throw from the French border. We don't know too terribly much about his early life, but he seems to have arrived in Mokena when it was a new village in the 1850s, and by 1860 was working as a farmhand for the Jacob Bauch family, who farmed just north of town on today's Wolf Road. And George Troyer was of the generation that fought the Civil War. So a month after it kicked off in 1861, he volunteered for duty in the 20th Illinois Volunteer Infantry, which was partially recruited from Will County, at which time George was working as a shoemaker here in town. Not even 20 years old yet. You can really see how just really patriotic he was, as he was only in the country for a few years at this point, and was already willing to lay down his life for it. No photographs of him have survived the years, unfortunately, but when he joined the Army, he was described as being about 5'5", having light hair and a light complexion and blue eyes. He saw hard service and fought at the February 1861 battle to capture the rebel Fort Donelson on the Cumberland River in Tennessee. The march to the battlefield was described as nothing short of hellish, as he and his comrades had to camp in the open air under a freezing, driving winter rain, after which the next morning their blankets were frozen solid to the ground and on top of them. An illness set in that was with George Troyer as he went into combat when a rebel ball passed through the meaty part of his leg. Had the ball shattered his bone, he would have lost the leg. There just was nothing else they could do at that time for that. But his blood was not shed in vain, as the capture of Fort Donelson was an early major victory for the North. And here is an artist's conception of the Battle of Fort Donelson. I'll kind of bring it around so everybody can see. It's February 1862, very serious battle in which George Troyer suffered a nasty wound in his leg. He could easily be one of these guys here laying in the foreground. The Battle of Fort Donelson. Despite his wound, he served with the 20th Illinois until his term of service ended in the summer of 1864, with almost a year left of the war. He did not want to leave the Army, though, and volunteered a second time, this time in February of 1865, into something called the Veteran Reserve Corps, or as it was sometimes called, the Invalid Corps, as it was made up of Union soldiers who were not totally able-bodied. And they did things like mend the forts that protected Washington, D.C., guard duty, stuff like this. But as we know, the war ended in April 1865, and exactly a year later, George Troyer married Anna Mavis at St. John's, who rests over here. They had at least two children. George Troyer, who was born in, George Jr., in 1867, who sadly died as an infant and is also interred in this plot, and a daughter, Elizabeth, who was born in 1868 and lived until the 1930s. In those few years after the war, the Troyers tried to seek fortune in Missouri. At the same time, a few other Mokenians did. But they wound up staying not too terribly long and came back up home. And somewhere in there, they briefly kept a saloon in town. But the Civil War never really ended for George Troyer, who was burdened by the wound in his leg that never really healed properly, and the effects of that wet, freezing night in Tennessee in 1862. His health issues that followed him in these years were compounded by an attack of tuberculosis, with which he lost his battle at the age of 31 years in December 1871. And his family had this stone put over his earthly remains. You'll notice this motif here of a hand plucking a link from a chain. You can really, when the sun's shining on it just perfectly, you can really see it. This hand symbolizes the hand of God, coming from a centuries-old belief that the soul was tethered to the body by a golden chain. Definitely one of Mokena's bravest. So we shall continue on to our next Civil War veteran, who's just a little ways, I can see his grave in the direction of the fence over there, another very interesting story. So if you follow me, please, let us continue. Oh, question.
Any idea why they left Germany?
That's a very good, I'll turn my microphone back on for this one. So, question was, why did George Troyer leave Germany? I don't know the exact reason why he left, but a lot of these families at St. John's that founded the church and helped found our village left towards the end of the 1840s, when that was a very, very hard time in Europe because revolution was sweeping the continent. Some of them, in fact, like the Sheik family, who a lot of us will know, left because they were revolutionaries and things didn't work out their way, and they would have been in serious trouble if they stayed. So George Troyer came a little after that. Whatever his exact reason was, I'm not sure, unfortunately. But that's kind of the root as to why quite a few of them left, though. So very good question. If anybody ever has any questions at any point, feel free to shout them out, or I'll do my best to answer them for you. Okay, so right this way, let us continue. Okie doke. So you will notice that there's lots of walking in today's tour. We're going to be going to every corner of the cemetery. That's because I tried to roughly keep it chronological. We will jump around a little bit, but that was kind of what the reasoning behind that was. But right here in this grave here is another one of our vaunted boys in blue from the Civil War, Martin Arnholt, who is one of those 8 Union veterans of the Civil War to be interred here. Unlike his brethren here, there isn't too terribly much that is known about his life, about what kind of person Martin Arnholt was, but it is known that he was born in November 1837. But even his place of origin is disputed. When he joined the army in the Civil War, he gave his birthplace as Joliet. But when he later died, Pastor Wilhelm Meyer of St. John's noted that he was born in the Alsace, which, very long story, was a disputed area that at times was German, at other times was France. That region now today does belong to France. But in the 1860 census, Martin Arnholt Sr., so this Martin's father, was recorded as living in Mokena. But Martin Jr., our guy right here, was nowhere to be seen. Probably because, as we'll see, he was out west. In 1863, at which point it was the middle of the Civil War, Martin Jr. volunteered for duty in the 2nd Colorado Cavalry and was mustered in at Denver, at which time Martin Arnholt was working as a harness maker. This unit would later be consolidated into the 3rd Colorado Infantry. This begs the question of why this Mokenian was all the way out there in a time period when Colorado wasn't even a state yet, was considered the far, far west. Could it have been because of the Pikes Peak Gold Rush in the Colorado Territory that took place in the late 1850s? There are Mokenians who have known to have taken part in that. And I bet Martin Arnholt was one of them and decided to just stay out there. But that's just my theory. We don't know for sure. Martin and his regiment, after they got mustered in and settled down, were sent to Missouri, where a particularly nasty chapter of the war was unfolding. And it was where that he took ill, Martin, and was sent to a military hospital in Rolla, Missouri, where he died on November 21st, 1863, at the age of 26, to chronic dysentery, which is something that I can't even imagine going through. This dreaded malady, dysentery, was the #1 non-combat cause of death in the Civil War. When Martin died, his personal effects were inventoried, and aside from the pieces of his uniform, he was found to be in possession of $14 in cash, a pocket knife, and a briarwood pipe. He was shipped home to Mokena on a journey that I'm sure took a very, very long time, and was one of the first people to be interred in this cemetery. And this is not his original gravestone, but the original base is still there. This marker that's here today was secured from the government by the Mokena Civic Association in the summer of 1940, when it was shipped over the Rock Island from Mississippi, 77 years after he died. So there you have it, a man who bravely gave his life for the Union in the Civil War. Let us continue on once again. Visit our final Civil War veteran for today, who has a pretty interesting story. Yeah, one that I really like. So once again, if you follow me, I'll kind of go around this way and lead the way just a few yards over this way. We'll meet one of the members of the Hacker family.
Oh, yay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh,
another question. Yes.
So this guy, he goes to Denver and he's sent back to Missouri. The troops at the time, horses had to be expensive. How did they move troops from Denver to Missouri?
That's a good question. So in Martin Arnholt's case, how are they moving troops from the Colorado Territory into Missouri? as horses probably were pretty expensive. That is a question I don't know the answer to. I can't imagine there was any railroad out there. Yeah, I really don't know how they got there. Somehow they did.
I just can't
yeah.
imagine those guys walking that distance.
Oh, no,
And
yeah.
I can't imagine them all having horses either.
Yeah, right. Yeah, no, that's a very good question. Yeah, I wish I knew the answer to that, but unfortunately, I do not. A very good question. Definitely something to think about, so absolutely. But yeah, right this way, we'll cross over the little road here and go down the ridge a little bit. Here is another one of our Civil War veterans, but unlike the first two we met today, Carl Hacker is his name, he lived a long life here in Mokena after the war, but one that nevertheless was still affected by a grievous injury that he suffered while he was in the service. To understand Mr. Hacker's life, we have to start at the beginning. Like a lot of the Mokenians of his era, he came from what is today Germany. Karl Wilhelm Friedrich Hacker was born in a tiny village called Rosenhagen on the Baltic Sea. And he was born February 23rd, 1846. Does that match what's on the gravestone? Okay, good. Yeah. When he was an infant, his homeland was torn apart by tumult and revolution. And like untold thousands of his countrymen and many of his future neighbors, Karl Hacker made his way to America as an adolescent. In October 1863, at barely 17 years old, Karl and his brother Christian, who was a year older, left the port of Hamburg aboard the John Bertram, a wooden ship guided by huge sails. After their voyage of a few weeks, the brothers made their way, after they landed, got to the east coast of the country, made their way across the states, and pretty much came directly here to eastern Will County, a place that was very friendly at the time to German folk. It looks like Karl Hacker's first stop upon arriving in America was at the home of his aunt and uncle, Maria and Heinrich Schmuel, who at that point were already well-established farmers along what is today Route 30 in New Lenox Township. The Schmuels loom large in the history of St. John's and are a little ways over there. So to set the stage, when Karl first arrived in America, and in this area in 1863, America was already 2 years deep into our nightmarish Civil War. In March of that year, conscription, the draft, started in the North. And at that time, there was a provision on the books that said if someone who was conscripted could furnish a substitute to go in his stead, then he would be excused from military service. Usually large amounts of money changed hands in this. And it wasn't really fair because only very rich men could afford this. So it is that years later, in the Hacker family, it would be passed down that Karl accepted a large payment to go to war in the place of a rich man. And on October 4th, 1864, he volunteered for duty in Company F of the 64th Illinois Volunteer Infantry. And he was just a fresh-faced 18-year-old boy then, and was recorded as having been 5 feet 6 inches tall, with brown hair, hazel eyes, and a light complexion. And years later, he would also remember that he didn't even speak a lick of English at the time. At some point, it's hard to figure out exactly when, but definitely not too long after New Year 1865, something happened that would follow Private Hacker for the rest of his life. In the lead up to the war's end, while at camp near Louisville, Kentucky, the regiment was out on drill, and while they were marching, Karl Hacker tripped and landed on a small stump, absorbing the blow in his left side. It would later be determined that this blow caused what was called a rupture in his torso. The injury was further aggravated by unloading some barrels of sugar and then marching through the Carolinas. And at one point, Carl could barely even walk. Making this even worse was the fact that he was taken prisoner of war on March 8th, 1865, just over a month before the war ended, at the oft-forgotten Battle of Wise Forks in North Carolina. He was held in the Confederate capital of Richmond for about 18 days and was released in a prisoner exchange in time to be mustered out of the Union Army in Springfield in July 1865. Life got back to normal for Carl Hacker after the war. He married Maria Mao in November 1867, who is here also in the same plot at the old St. John's Church. Together they had 5 children between 1868 and 1880, those being in the order of their birth: Louisa, Charles, George, Minnie, and Philip. What is really remarkable for their time is that all of the Hacker children lived well into adulthood, and all of them were born in Mokena, with the exception of Philip, the youngest, who was born in Gallatin, Missouri, while the family was living there for 2 years. In the fall of 1878, Carl Hacker bought a house on today's McGovney Street for $600, which would stay in the family for decades and is still standing. Carl would build his career working for the Chicago, Rock Island, and Pacific Railroad, as so many in Mokena did over the years. Among other positions, he worked as a switchman and eventually as a foreman for the section in Mokena. All in all, he put in 43 years with the Rock Island. Carl Hacker was a very respected man in Mokena, as is evidenced by his election to serve on the village board in 1896, a seat that he held until 1902. And he breathed his last on October 24th, 1916, at his home on McGovney Street, having reached the age of 70 years, thus closing a life that was a microcosm of American history. Very interesting character. Went through, even though he was only in the Union Army for a relatively short time compared to a lot of his comrades, still went through a lot. Very interesting and very brave man. If we continue on, we'll meet one of our World War I veterans, a man who, if you've been in Mokena a while, you'll probably recognize his name or at least his last name. So if you follow me, please let us head just over that way a little bit, just up the hill a little bit more to get to meet Barney Hastert. So if you follow me, please, right this way again. So as we spring forward in American history a little bit, I'd like to introduce you to Barney Hastert, who, exactly, and if you've been around Mokena a while, you'll know his name. His family's still around. Not only one of our veterans, but also a very significant figure in the business history of Mokena. Barney Hastert came into the world on March 8th, 1891 in Homer Township. His family had a farm right near 159th Street and Will Cook Road, where he grew up and spent his earliest years. And sometime around 1910 or thereabouts, when Barney was just a very young man, he got a job working as a farmhand for a man in Orland Township, but really just a tad north of Mokena, named Elmer Cooper, who was about 12 years older than him. And when these two guys came together, it meant big things for the history of Mokena, as we'll see. But in 1916, with World War I raging in Europe, Barney Hastert and Elmer Cooper went into a business partnership and founded the Cooper and Hastert Ford Agency in Mokena, which was a Ford dealership and garage, and the first automotive business in our town's history. They built a little building on First Street immediately north of Mokena Hall, which stood on the site of where Avalanche Jewelry now is. Mokena Hall was where Avalanche Jewelry now is, and their little building that Cooper and Hastert built for their business was immediately north, fronting on First Street. But as we know, the next year, 1917, America entered World War I. And a few months later, in early 1918, Barney Hastert received an invitation from Uncle Sam to join the Army. On April 2nd, a big going-away party was held at Mokena Hall for Barney and 3 other men who were leaving, and the town saw them off. The guys all traveled together, and as they passed through Cleveland, Elvin McGovney met them, who grew up in Mokena, and gave them all care packages, which had things like apples, cigars, and newspapers for them. Barney Hastert got to Fort Williams, Maine, where he did his training, and then eventually was sent to Fort Monroe, Virginia, near the Chesapeake Bay, where he was teaching other soldiers how to drive. Because 1918, America wasn't really a place yet where tons of people knew how to drive at that time, drive a car. So it was, though, that World War I ended on November 11th, 1918, before Barney ever even got to it. He was sent home 2 months later and got home back to Mokena on January 19th, 1919. So you might think that Barney Hastert's World War I story maybe wasn't that exciting compared to what we've heard already so far today, but I still wanted to highlight it because his story is representative of thousands of Americans who served in the military during that time, because a good number of the Americans who served in the Army or Navy during this war never made it overseas because it was over for us so quickly. The United States was only in World War I for about a year and a half, while the European countries were in it for the whole 4 years. Barney Hastert married Viola Laufer right after the war, and her grandfather, who's right over here, was one of the founders of St. John's. And her great-grandmother, Filipina, was the first person to be buried in this cemetery, as we know. With this marriage, Barney Hastert and Elmer Cooper, his business partner, became brothers-in-law, as Viola Hastert's older sister was Elmer's wife, Ella. Barney and Viola Hastert would go on to have a big family, 6 kids altogether, with Bernice being the oldest, born in 1920, then Charles, or Chuck, who a lot of people might remember, Eleanor, Arthur, Norma Jean, and the youngest, Bernard Jr., who died as an infant in 1935. But aside from him, all the other kids lived to be adults and have families of their own, and were and are a very respected and admired people. And I can show you a picture of the Hastert family right here, if I can get my binder. There we go. Bring it around for everybody to see. So there's Barney Hastert right there, Viola Hastert, Mrs. Hastert, and all of their kids. And the only one that's still with us today is Norma, right there. She's in her 90s today. Well, she probably, hope she's not mad that I gave her age away, but.
Which one's Chuck?
Right here. Yep. Chuck Hastert, very nice man. Absolutely. The Hastert family of Mokena.
He was in the service too, wasn't he? Or just a pilot?
He was, yeah. So Barney's, 2 of Barney's sons, Chuck Hastert and Art Hastert, were World War II veterans. And Chuck is here. He passed away not too terribly long ago, unfortunately, as did Art Hastert. He was in the Navy during World War II. He may be here as well. Somebody out there that's watching will know and let us know, but absolutely. Very good, very classic Mokena family. So let's see, where were we? Oh, the rest of Barney Hastert's story here. So the Cooper and Hastert Ford Agency moved out of that little building on First Street and into a much bigger space directly south on Front Street in 1923. They moved into the building that had used to house Mokena Hall. They became a long-time business in that location for decades and really put Mokena on the map. They had many, many customers from Mokena and the surrounding area who were loyal to them for years. And Barney Hastert was also very active with the Mokena Volunteer Fire Department, giving them countless hours over the years. He was appointed assistant chief in 1932. And if you've ever seen the old fire engine that the fire department brings out, like for the 4th of July parade and special events and stuff like that, that was Mokena's first automobile engine. And Barney was the one who converted it from a coal truck into a fire engine. So I think of him whenever I see it, really. But on Friday evening, December 11th, 1959, Barney Hastert and Viola were headed to a card party. When Barney sat down to watch TV while he was waiting for his wife, and he nodded off to sleep and never woke up. He was 68 years old. You might notice this little emblem right here on his gravestone that says MWA. That stands for Modern Woodmen of America, which was a fraternal organization that was very popular in Mokena in Barney's day. Tons of members. They had a local camp and the whole kit and caboodle. So not only was Barney Hastert one of our brave veterans, a doughboy in World War I, but a very historic person in Mokena in general. You can't write the history of Mokena without Barney Hastert in there too. So once again, we shall continue.
Matt, I'm sorry, Matt, can I jump in? I wanted to say one thing about Barney, or have you mention one thing?
Yeah.
'Cause it's not necessarily related to the military service, but talk about his role in the Deputy Walter Fisher.
Oh, yeah.
If you don't know, we've done episodes on it. We went to the village talking about Deputy Fisher, and Matt wrote an awesome book about it.
Thank you.
But he played a role in that too, so I just maybe interject that a little bit.
Oh, absolutely. So this is another one of these ways in which Mr. Hastert really figures big into our history. So if you're unfamiliar with the name of Deputy Walter Fisher, Mr. Fisher was a young man who was a storekeeper in Mokena on Front Street in the 1920s, just a couple doors away from Cooper and Hastert. And he also was a part-time Will County Sheriff's deputy because the 1920s were prohibition. Alcohol was illegal, all that stuff. Everything was going crazy with bootlegging and organized crime and stuff like that. So the Will County Sheriff went to all of the rural towns in Will County at the time and appointed maybe one or two guys in each village as a deputy, part-time deputy, to help with this crime fighting. And Mr. Fisher, Walter Fisher, was one of them. So on April 14th, 1926, coming up on the 100-year anniversary, Deputy Fisher got a call from Dr. Ernest McMahon outside town that his car had just been stolen from under him. Nowadays, we'd call this carjacking. So Deputy Fisher got the call to go out and chase this guy to try to get his car back. He went and grabbed Barney Hastert to come with him to help. Deputy Fisher was armed with his pistol. Barney Hastert grabbed his shotgun and one shell, just in case he needed it. They caught up with the auto thief, chased him over the Cook County line just outside what is today Orland Park. When they overtook the man, a very brief gunfight ensued, and Deputy Fisher was shot and bled to death, making him the only the only law enforcement figure from Mokena to ever have died in the line of duty. And that day, Barney Hastert was caught in the crossfire as he was directly next to Deputy Fisher when this happened, and a stray bullet or a shard of glass from the windshield of one of the cars gave him a really nasty cut on the tip of his nose that left a very noticeable scar that he had for the rest of his life. And I think it's an interesting story. One of the members of the Hastert family a few years back shared with me the doctor's bill from the doctor in Joliet that treated Barney Hastert for this cut on his nose. And if I remember right, I should have bought this stuff with today. If I remember right, the doctor didn't charge Barney Hastert because he thought he was such a brave guy for chasing an auto thief. So that's the story of April 14th, 1926, and Barney Hastert's role in that. Very interesting. He never really talked about it. I've asked members of his immediate family if he ever really would mention the events of that day. He was always pretty quiet about it. He never had too much to say about it. Although one man I know, Mokena firefighter named Chuck Manhart. If anybody's Mokena, you might know him. Asked Barney Hostert about it one day, and the only thing Barney had to say about it was, well, I should have put my boots on a little slower that day. Something like that. So yeah, very interesting story. And we're working on getting Deputy Fisher some sort of plaque or memorial or something in the village, so in a prominent spot so people will see it and remember him. His name is on the law enforcement memorial in Joliet, but there's nothing here in Mokena, his hometown, that really remembers him. Although the village did pass a resolution, I believe it was, in his honor not too terribly long ago.
Yeah, last year I think it was, thanks to us going and pushing them on it, and them committing at the time at least to have a permanent memorial of some type on Front Street or in the village to Deputy Fisher. So.
Absolutely, yeah. So we're kind of still working on it, especially with the 100th anniversary of his sacrifice coming up. So, so we'll have to see what happens. But
read Matt's book; it's really good.
Thanks, Israel. Thank you very much. Yeah, the book is. I don't know if the Chamber of Commerce sells it anymore. You can get it at Barnes and Noble, Amazon. You just look up my name, Matt Galik. You'll see it on there. It's called The 1926 Orland Park Murder Mystery. Not my title, that's what the publisher called it. 90% of the book is about Mokena, but, so yeah, it's out there. So good stuff, yeah. If there weren't any more questions about Barney Hostert's life or about Deputy Fisher, we can move on. We'll jump a little forward in the timeline and go to a World War II veteran before we head over to the veterans plot in the far corner of the cemetery and handle another World War I and some more World War II guys, So right this way, folks. So as we are just kind of walking around the cemetery and you're kind of looking at the different graves and so on and so forth, you'll probably notice there are tons of veterans buried here. You'll see lots of World War I and lots of World War II especially. But I only picked just a handful of the ones that I thought were the most representative to talk about. And especially people whose families I thought would be easily remembered and recognized. But about 125 men and women from Mokena fought in World War II. And one of them was this gentleman, Edward L. Laufer. If anyone here happens to remember Shorty Laufer, who was a famous Mokena person, he was Edward's older brother. And he is right... Shorty's over here, right over there. Very famous, well-known Mokena person. But Ed, as he was known, Ed Laufer was born on January 31st, 1919, on his family's farm at the southwest corner of 191st Street and 104th Avenue. He grew up there with 2 brothers and 2 sisters, and flashing forward to 1941, when America entered World War II after Pearl Harbor, Ed was 22 and working as a welder at the time. At first, his occupation exempted him from military service as it was deemed vital to the war effort, but he wound up being inducted into the Army anyway on July 26, 1943. Ed Laufer found his way to the Army Air Corps, where he was classified as a pilot, but as luck would have it, there were no training openings for his position. So at the end of the day, he got his wings still and became a navigator on a 4-engine B-17 bomber. He and his crew flew their plane overseas bound for Europe on October 28, 1944. They bounced around with detours in Newfoundland, Morocco, and Egypt, but they touched down 2 weeks later in Foggia, Italy, which would be Ed's home for the next 3 months. And I can show everybody here a picture of Ed Laufer and his siblings. That's Edward right there. Brothers and sisters. That's Shorty, for those of you who knew him. Yep. And one interesting little thing about this picture is that you can see this must have been taken at the Laufer farmhouse on 191st Street. As you can see the family's blue star in the window. If you're not familiar with this tradition, you still see it a little bit today, but it was especially commonplace during World War II. If a family had a family member in the service during the time, they would have a blue star like that hanging in their window. Or if it was more than one, 2 stars, 3 stars. And if you saw a gold star, that meant that they lost that person. You sometimes hear about that today, gold star families. That's what that means. But while they were in Italy, the crew became attached to the 301st Bomb Group of the 15th Army Air Force. And while he was there, Ed Laufer celebrated his 26th birthday, and like they did for all of Mokena's people in uniform, the Mokena Women's Service Club took good care of him and sent him some fudge for his birthday. If you can believe it, the whole thing made it all the way from Mokena to Italy in one piece. Lieutenant Laufer flew a total of 15 missions against the Nazis, hitting targets in the cradle of the Third Reich in Germany and Austria, as well as Czechoslovakia, Yugoslavia, and northern Italy. February 13th, 1945 was a day that stayed with Ed for the rest of his life. That day, he was flying a run over Vienna, Austria, and as Ed was steadying his camera, he had a camera with him, at one of the plane's small windows to take a picture of the sky filled with flak explosions, his B-17 took a direct hit. When he looked out the windows on the other side of the fuselage, he saw that both wings were completely aflame and that their oxygen system had been destroyed by shrapnel. The B-17 stayed in formation for about 2 minutes, but started to go into a slow downward plunge. I can't imagine how scared Ed must have been, but he had no alternative. He had to bail out by parachute at 25,000 feet. 3 of his 10 comrades never made it out of the plane. After landing on the banks of the Danube River, he was taken prisoner by 5 Nazi soldiers. Being a prisoner of war was not a pleasant experience, but not too long after he was captured, one of his overseers gave him a glass of wine, and while another one spoke English with him, as it turned out that the man had worked in Boston before the war. He was shipped all over the Third Reich by train and truck and interrogated by the Nazis extensively, but at no point was Ed ever tortured. After a hard 15-day march through Bavaria, he arrived at the infamous Stalag 7A at Moosburg, Germany. When Ed Laufer was there were over 29,000 other Allied POWs there, and hardly any food to go around. Back home on 191st Street, his parents got a telegram that he was missing in action, and I can't even imagine how nervous and anxious they must have been at his condition and whereabouts. Finally, on April 29th, 1945, about a week before the war in Europe ended, Ed and his compatriots were liberated by the American 4th Armored Division, and the Laufers back on 191st Street finally got word that he was safe. The summer the war ended, Lieutenant Laufer married June Waters and went on to keep a hardware store in Frankfurt and be the father of 3 daughters. After seeing the worst of war, Ed Laufer lived a life of peace. The Laufers later moved home in Hearth to Texas, where the former navigator would come to own a miniature golf course. He loved playing bridge and skiing in Colorado, and would go on to attend the inauguration of President Reagan and seeing the launching of the USS Ronald Reagan aircraft carrier. Lieutenant Edward Laufer crossed the great beyond in November 2013 at the lofty age of 94. He was brought back home to Mokena, where he was interred here, and these flyer's wings on his tombstone symbolize all he did in World War II to make the world a better place. Very interesting story, very interesting story. And actually not the only Laufer we're gonna meet today. But if you will, we will continue and take our longest walk of the tour today and head over to the veterans section, which is right over there, just by, kind of by where we're parked and over by the entrance to the cemetery. where there's a few more pretty interesting stories waiting for us. Okay, so before we continue on to our next veteran, you're probably, as we're walking around here, you're probably taking in just how huge this cemetery really is. We started in that original section that dates back to 1863, as we were talking about, the Civil War days. And this whole section right here, kind of where the trees aren't as big and grown up as they are in the older section, what was added on to the old cemetery back in 1926 when the church purchased that property and stuck it onto the old cemetery. So it pretty much doubled in size. And this little area right here where we're standing now was laid out by our VFW, the William Martin Post, in 1946, right after World War II, for veterans and their spouses, some of which we're going to meet today. But right now, here with us today is another World War I veteran, one whose experience was quite different from Barney Hostert's. So I'd like you to meet Fred Steinhagen. Fred Henry Steinhagen was born September 19th, 1894, near Frankfurt. He came from a big family, very big family, and his parents were both sturdy people who were born in Germany. Germanic culture is something that Fred grew up with, and in fact, when he was really little, he went by Fritz. Around 1903, the Steinhagens moved here to Mokena onto a farm on the east side of Schoolhouse Road, a few yards south of where it joins with today's 3rd Street. And Fred Steinhagen went to school until he was in 8th grade, and when he was a teenager, went to work as a farmhand on Nicholas Junker's farm, which was east of town on today's 191st Street again, almost to Harlem Avenue. When he was a young man, Fred Steinhagen worked at Bowman Dairy's milk bottling plant on Wolf Road, and I can show you a picture of him and his co-workers at that time. This is probably around 1910 or thereabouts. This is the crew that was working Bowman Dairy at the time. Some of these guys are posing with milk bottles. I think that's a pretty cool picture. It's Fred Steinhagen right there with his co-workers at Bowman Dairy. Bowman Dairy was where the wallpaper mill used to be, if anybody remembers that in Mokena. So, getting back to everything here, let's see, turn the page back. So, like many young men his age, in what was the defining event of his generation, Fred Steinhagen received a call to military service in World War I in September 1917 when he was 23 years old. At the time, he worked for Barney Hostert at the Ford garage, and Fred's first training camp was Fort Dodge, Iowa, where he became part of the 349th Infantry. Not too long after he got there, though, he was sent to San Antonio, Texas. And while he was there, he got pretty sick around New Year's 1918, but luckily, he was able to pull through. It's interesting though, because when he was when he was in Texas at Camp Logan, he bumped into 2 other Mokena guys who just happened to be there at the same time. One of them was Fred Hench, who's just a couple yards over this way today. Fred got to France and the front lines in the fall of 1918. And while he was there, even once sent a letter to his father that he wrote on the banks of a trench. It was a time when the war was rapidly coming to a close, and the individual German fighters that Fred encountered were anxious to surrender, but it was still a dangerous time as he was gassed in a poisonous gas attack in those final days, which took him months to recover from. Soon after the war's end, in September 1918, Fred Steinhagen was in the Army of Occupation in Germany, Germany proper, and was also in Luxembourg for a while. And he was sent home on June 12th, 1919, 7 months after the war ended. And after the war, he worked at Bowman again for a while. At the time, Fred Steinhagen lived with his parents, who had moved off the farm at that point and were they had owned the house on the southeast corner of Mokena and First Streets. The house is still there, and Fred later inherited it or bought it from his parents, and he lived there for many years. Fred was married twice to 2 ladies named Rose and Mary. Mary is here, and he was active in the VFW William Martin Post 725 after the war, which is our post here in town. He also works as a trucker and owned a corn shelling business. When he finally retired in 1961, he had been working for the village, where he was kind of a one-man public works department, where he did a little bit of everything. And here we can see a picture of Mr. Steinhagen in his later years. There he is right there with wife number 2, Mary. Fred Steinhagen, World War I veteran. Mrs. Steinhagen. At home in Mokena. The picture was probably taken in the 1960s or thereabouts. But after a life well-lived, long-lived, Fred Steinhagen passed away on June 8th, 1975, and was fittingly interred here in the Veterans section of St. John Cemetery. Although World War I has taken a back seat in our collective memory to World War II, there are still countless tales of brave Americans from then, and Fred Steinhagen was one of them. For our next personage we'll get to meet, I will walk right over here. So even though he firmly belongs to the World War II era, here I'd like us to meet one of the bravest men in Mokena's entire history, Second Lieutenant Oliver Parker Laufer. And he was Ed Laufer's first cousin, who we just met over there, first cousin. Known as Ollie in Mokena, he was born December 13th, 1921, and went to Mokena Public School, which is where the village hall is now, and played on the basketball team. He later went to high school, both in Mokena, as Mokena had a 2-year high school in his day, and later Ollie went to Joliet, like lots of Mokenians in this era. And here is his senior picture from Joliet Township. So that was senior year at Joliet Township High School. But Ollie grew up with his family on the southern corner of Wolf Road and Parker Street, and his house is still there today. And one of his best friends was Chuck Hostert, who lived just across the road from him. As we all know, America entered World War II in December 1941, and Ollie went into the service in March 1942, 3 months after Pearl Harbor, and volunteered for the Army Air Corps, where he would fight Nazis above the clouds. Right before he left, his friends put on a going-away party for him at St. Mary's Hall on Wolf Road, which stood right where the entrance to their cemetery is nowadays. Ollie started flyer training in California at Santa Ana Army Air Base, and then finished advanced flying school around Christmas time 1942, where he earned a second lieutenant's commission and his wings at Kirtland Field near Albuquerque. Ollie was going to be part of a bomber crew. His position was that of a bombardier, which consisted of manually using a bomb sight in the nose of a B-17 Flying Fortress to personally rain deadly cargo into Hitler's backyard. And here's a really cool picture of Ollie in uniform, with his headphones, thick leather coat with the sheepskin lining, the flyer scarves. Really cool picture. And from March 1943, Ollie was stationed in England with the 326th Bomber Squadron of the 92nd Bomber Group. And he was always riding back home to his mother Florence on Wolf Road. And one time he said that he and his buddies were actually able to pick up German radio broadcasts. And one time he even said that they were able to recognize the Jersey Bounce, which was a popular dance at the time that was coming through from the German side. Once they even picked up propaganda broadcasts that said the Americans were getting gangsters from Chicago to man their bombers. Ali's words in his letters also included homesickness. And once he said, the end of the war can't come too soon for me. And those who knew Ali Laufer said he completed 5 missions over northern Germany, attacking the port cities of Hamburg and Kiel. On July 26, 1943, he and his fellow crew members were returning from a raid over Hanover, Germany, when a Nazi fighter collided with their huge bomber. With its tail torn to shreds, Ali's plane was last seen plunging into the murky depths of the North Sea. Ali's mother received a telegram a little over a week later saying that he was missing in action. And although down the line, the Army would change this status to killed in action. Posthumously awarded the Purple Heart, which we can see right here. In February 1944, 7 months after his sacrifice, 2 Army officers personally visited Ali's mother on Wolf Road and presented her with the Air Medal, which he had won for valor. There was even a ceremony for the handing over of the medal in the gym of Mokena Public School that most of the town turned out for. But this here is an empty grave. Ali is buried in the North Sea. This marker was put here in 1959, 16 years after he was lost. After that, and for decades later, everyone who lived in Mokena when he did knew who he was and what his sacrifice meant. This is not the case anymore. Ask pretty much any Mokenian who Ali Laufer was, and nobody knows. And that is something that absolutely breaks my heart. You probably heard me say it on other tours, but the greatest casualty is being forgotten. And therefore I ask you to please remember Ali Laufer today and every day. So let's see here. I think we'll move on to our last person today. And he is just right behind us, right by the flagpole over here. So we'll just kind of shift around a little bit. Okay. Right here. Okay. So allow me to introduce another one of Mokena's brave World War II veterans, George August Frederick Hench, who was born November 4th, 1921, here in Mokena, making him the same age as Ali Laufer, who we just met. George was the oldest of 3 sons to his parents. His middle names come from his grandfather and father, who were both well-known figures in town and in the history of the village. Here is Fred Hench, who's George's father, who also was a World War I veteran. And his grandpa, August Hench, is buried over in the older section of the cemetery, way over there. But like so many young men his age, George was inducted into the Army during World War II. It was in October of 1942 when he was just 21 years old. And around the time he went into the service, he was working at a molding company in Chicago. And here is George Hench in uniform. That's what he looked like. One of the 125 men and women from Mokena who fought in World War II. That's him right there. And his training was like countless other American GIs. And George Hench was sent to the European theater of war to fight Hitler in October 1944 with the 12th Armored Division. The division's insignia is right here on his tombstone, and you could tell that his family was really proud of his service, and that he was too. During the war, George was credited by his officers as having been a superior soldier, During the Battle of the Bulge in Belgium, his unit stopped a huge German breakthrough, which helped earn them laurels. And as the 12th Armored Division moved forward into Germany, a terrible incident befell George in the last days of the war in 1945. George's job was a half-track driver, which is like a transport vehicle. The front wheels are normal wheels, normal tires like you'd see on a car, and the back wheels are like tank treads. And while he was out with some men on his vehicle on his half-track, a German soldier shot them with a Panzerfaust, which is a bazooka-type weapon, an anti-tank weapon. And when this happened, George suffered severe burns on his face, arms, and hands from this, and he was evacuated to a hospital in England where he recovered. And for his ghastly injury, he was awarded the Purple Heart. But the war ended that spring. George Hench was home in Mokena by Christmas time 1945, and he became very active with the William Martin Post 725 of the VFW, and he became their senior vice commander soon after he got home. In a painful and heart-wrenching irony, after barely surviving some of the worst fighting in the most terrible war in recorded history, George Hench perished in a car accident on 159th Street a year after the war ended. All in all, 4 young men and 2 young women from the village died that night, and it has gone down as one of the most painful days in Mokena history. This was something that was not talked about openly for decades after it happened, and all but one of those young men were World War II veterans. 2 of the other young people who we lost in that accident, Dean and Joan Rickert, are right here. And as they were, or after they were laid away here, the cortege went back to Emmanuel Lutheran on Union Street and held George's service, which was conducted with military honors. He was the 3rd person to be buried in this plot after the Rickerts, and when the cortege came back here, taps was played and salutes were fired for him. George Hench suffered for our village and our country during World War II, and even though he was struck down in his prime, his sacrifice deserves to be remembered by Mokena. And that wraps us up. So that is that. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, guys. Thank you for coming out today. I'm really, really happy and impressed with this turnout. I wasn't expecting this many people to show up. And people that traveled huge distances to be here, too. Wow. So, very flattered and honored by that. So, did you have anything to say, Israel? Or
No, I don't know if are there any questions.
Yeah, were there any questions today? Or
otherwise, Matt and I, this month was 3 years that Matt and I have been doing the podcast together. So it's awesome to see. We've grown on social media and on our YouTube channels, and a lot of people. It's just great to see that there's an interest. That people enjoy the history. I mean, Matt's put his whole life into gathering this information, and
pretty much, yeah.
Just glad to have a place that we can gather it and hopefully pass it down for the next generations to know these people too. It's. I'm sure, like all of you, my grandfathers were 2 World War II heroes. One was a bombardier. One was, in the Battle of the Bulge. So it's really interesting to hear, this shared, and it's a deep interest to me. To me as well. So thank you all very much. I would love it if you'd share it if you're on social media, or send an email to your friends. Grab the link on YouTube. I think it's a great thing to share, and I hope you guys would appreciate it as well. Thank you, Matt.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thanks to everybody who came out today and for listening to these stories.
Order arms.